So we've had whistle-stop tours of both the role of community board and governance structures, and we've had a bit of a look around operationally at how we're delivering the strategy and what's happened in the last 3 months and what's coming up in the next couple of months. We're now just going to take a bit more of a look at the Community Support Committee that was launched at our kickoff event. And I'm delighted to say we've got Chris Banks, the chair of the committee, with us to give you a bit of an update and to share some reflections. Over to you, Chris. And we can see the slides as well.
Okay, thanks ever so much, John. So firstly, I'm going to apologise. I'm getting over a bit of a sore throat, so my voice is a little bit hoarse. So if you see me go mute or come off camera, it's because I'm most probably taking a sip of water, because I'm sure you don't want to hear me cough. So first of all, I suppose for those that I haven't had the opportunity to meet with or were on the last convention, here's just a little bit about me. I currently work for a Magic Circle law firm as an enterprise architect. On the left-hand side, there's representation of some of the organisations I've worked with over the last 25 years, and been with BCS now for about a decade. So it's been a story of two halves, I suppose. First of all, navigating my way around the BCS, becoming chartered, and then for the last 5 years being actively involved with enterprise architecture, specialist group, career mentoring, and now community support committee, which today I'd like to talk to you about, just reflecting on the journey that we've been on, covering 3 key areas around establishing CSC, some of the learning points that there have been, and also some of the good practice that's starting to that's already been introduced, and some of the things that are emerging and what's going to be coming soon. And the thing that I'm really excited about is going to be able to share with you the committee that's been appointed. So first of all, just reflecting on how established Community Support Committee, there's a few slides that just really wanted to recap that were shared in the last convention for those that were unable to join. The why. So there's 6 sort of key points that we were highlighting around how things have been evolving, especially in the last few years, thinking about some of the good that's happening in different areas across the BCS community, and some of the need really to surface some of this stuff at scale, and how things have changed in sort of post-pandemic world. And there's some member group rules that are a bit dated. So there's quite a few things that are feeding into the why. And thinking about just our aims. So there's 4 aims for Community Support Committee, which is around identifying, developing, adopting, sharing good practice. And that's very much for the benefit of the members to support the Institute's Royal Charter strategy. And then also thinking about communication and how working with member groups around rules, processes, procedures, and thinking about how they can be applied, monitored going forwards. Recognising that, like lots of things have a life cycle, so do member groups. So really thinking about how some of those things around sort of the rules evolve, but also thinking about how to be able to provide some advice around to community board around sort of member groups that are being established, amended, or closed in some areas. So really looking to bridge the gap and join the dots between the BCS community board and the member group community. So here's just a view of the BCS governance, which hopefully helps give a visualization of what Alistair shared earlier on across the boards and the committee. And this is where we see Community Support Committee sitting, working closely with the community team and headquarters Swindon, to be able to be there, to be able to encourage and support member groups between each other, but also to think about supporting member groups in things that are new, things that are emerging, but also listening to some of the feedback that there's been and acting on that as we go forwards. So now pivoting slightly from the recap. So how we established Community Support Committee. So back in 2021, the terms of reference was developed. And one of the things that I worked through, which was really understanding all of the terms of reference and making sure that we could establish a committee that was going to be able to deliver against terms of reference to be effective. So with all of the roles that have been defined, which you can see on the right-hand side, all of the responsibilities defined within the terms of reference have been mapped to all of the roles. There are one or two which span across the entire committee as well. So together, we will be able to deliver against the terms of reference as we go forwards. So once we'd started to shape some of the idea, and I was working through with John and his team a lot of the details, we then got to the point about how do we start making the information available so people can start to understand what the Community Support Committee is actually about, what we're aiming to do, and also how people can register interest. So what we intended to do, which I hope came across, which was to make it easy to do the right thing and to register interest. So we created a real simple form just around the information that we really needed to gather to start building a bit of a view around what roles people were interested in, and also understanding sort of people's involvement, level of professionalism, and thinking about the membership that they have at the moment within the BCS. So created simple QR codes that people could scan just to be able to get straight on their mobile phone to be able to register interest within a couple of minutes. So after a long process of interest being registered, applications, interviews, I'm absolutely delighted to be able to announce that we've now appointed some of the roles for our committee, and just really to, I suppose, home in on one area, really, that with everything we've been talking about with the governance, there's been obviously a lot of direction that's been provided, but as we see CSC emerging, is very much going to be focused on the how layer of the governance. So thinking about how we're sharing the best practice, utilizing our scale to create impact. So I suppose without any further ado, I'd like to start off by introducing Kitty Hung, PhD Chartered Fellow, who joins us with experience as a principal consultant, working for a global design and engineering consultancy, spanning public, private sector, lots of business analyst experience, multilingual, and also involved with BCS London Central member group as well. So Kitty joins us with over 20 years experience. We also have Sathpal, who's joining the committee, so Chartered Fellow, Chartered Manager, and also heavily involved around sort of learning and performance. So Sathpal is going to be focusing very much around volunteer development and building on some of the things that he's been doing, leading global engineering practice for a financial services organization and co-founding Making Community podcasts. He sort of brings a different dimension to how to do events and conventions. So we really felt that there was some great skills that he had around how to surface, showcase, and celebrate success around what people are doing. He's also involved in Agile Methods Specialist Group, and he's also a CITP assessor. So Sahir, who I think is on the call, is an absolute joy to have Sahir join the committee with the wealth of knowledge that she has of BCS governance and a wealth of experience in volunteering over the last 12 years, spanning a handful of different member groups, whether that's been around different specialist groups or thinking about some BCS women, quality, and also now as chair of the business change member group 2. So she's going to be focusing very much around specialist groups, community, and what we're doing in that area. And then finally, Kieran Hoy, so a fellow who is very much focused around driving professionalism. He brings a new lens. So all of the people that I've mentioned so far have had lots of experience of member groups, familiar with BCS governance. And the reason for introducing Kieran, he brings a different perspective and thinking about branches and the community and touching different regions and people. That Kieran, in his day job, he's deputy CIO for NHS, Birmingham and Solihull ICB, previously clinical CCG. So he's familiar with spanning primary care, working with councils, working with industry, working with academia, and has also been driving organisational membership throughout Birmingham and Solihull ICB, really raising the level of professionalism that there is. So lucky to have Kieran bringing a very different lens, and also that business to tech translation. Together, I hope you can see sort of, whilst it's been quite a long process that we've gone through, trying to identify the right skills, capability and candidates, we've arrived at a point where I think there's definitely a lot of diversity of thought, experience and competence that we now see coming together across the committee as we start to get going. So some of the learning points along the way. I'm going to start with the updated plan. So with best intentions, we had a plan and things changed. So there were external influencing factors and they came from different areas. Around the time as we were starting registration, I'd like to thank John Alistair and others for the support they gave me as I was going through a family bereavement. And also at the time where we were seeing there was so much of an overwhelming interest in people wanting to apply that John and I spoke and said, we need to draw a line in the sand and fix a date of when we're going to stop the registrations, which got us to the 14th of November. And as you can see, we had a bit of a shift and a domino effect that occurred where it shifted out some of the dates, but hopefully from what I've shared with the committee members that we're now lucky enough to have on board, it's been worth the wait. And we've also delivered on, I suppose, a large chunk of the plan since September of what we set out to do. So there's still more to come. But I think the one takeaway is, as we're starting as a committee, I think the spirit in how we've started, which is be ready for change and thinking about if we need to pivot, we've got to pivot fast because continuous learning is always going to be happening and things will evolve over time. Which leads me on to some of the challenges and opportunities that there've been through this journey. So when I was appointed as chair, prior to communicating around the launch of the committee, there was some work that John was kind enough to open up his team to engage in a workshop that I led with them. And so working with the community coordinators, I wanted to try and get a lens for the temperature of what was actually going on across the community. So use a very traditional value proposition, customer profiling tactic for a workshop. And what was interesting, you can see the amount of digital post-its that were shared. We did some analysis around sort of thinking about the roles that people have as they volunteer, but the jobs that they do, and some of the pains that they suffer today, and some of the things that they're trying to achieve, and thinking about how we strike that right balance with product services, but how we can provide a bit of relief, how we can help. The further analysis that we did actually surfaced something quite interesting, which was we looked at all of the contributions that had been in the workshop and we aligned it to the strategic pillars. So as you can see here, 44% of things that traditionally came up across the community align with the BCS strategic pillars, which was good news. But there were 56% of items that didn't align with the strategic pillars. So I think what this started to tell me, which is there's already good things that are happening in pockets, but some of the requests for information might be because it's too difficult to do the right thing and it's not easy to get things done, and people are asking for help in the community, and that was reflected in a lot of the feedback that there was. So from there I then started to look across the member group strategies, plans for forthcoming year, and how they're aiming to align with strategic goals and pillars, and went out into the community, so creating networking opportunities by attending events that I might not have attended previously. So one that was quite poignant, which was around the launch of the Coding Black Females BCS report that happened. I was lucky enough on that event that there was also the Green Specialist Group and some other member groups that were there, and the attendance absolutely surprised me. But it was great to hear firsthand from the fireside chat that was taking place of people in industry, people that are coming up against challenges, what they were, but also afterwards to be able to spend time with people in different member groups to understand a bit more around some of the areas that required some focus. So some of that led to me meeting with some of the committee chairs, also talking with some of the inclusion officers about some of the struggles and challenges that are faced around the inclusion officer role, which is really why we sort of started to think about how do we position sort of the member group roles officer and the volunteer development officer as a priority, recognizing sort of people really matter. So I'll come on to some of that in a moment, but I think the key area was, from all of these different interactions, methods, tactics that I took, it surfaced that the need for DE&I for continuous collaboration, so we can think about how we're driving professionalism, how we're trying to bridge the gap in digital divide, and how we're starting to think about sort of how we can do better for the planet and drive towards sort of more net zero. We keep hearing about lots of things around what's now happening with emissions from data centers, cloud, and various other stuff. So there's lots of influencing factors, but it was definitely quite a journey that I went through, and I'm very grateful for everything that people shared to help me really sort of start to pivot my focus around how important it was that we were people focused. So all of this was really happening as we were going through contacting the volunteers across the community, how we were reaching out to diverse and ethics member groups. But then as we were starting to go through the recruitment process, we were really starting to understand what the applicants thought they could bring, what they could share, the diverse experience, qualities that they had, and what they were interested in doing. One of the things that I asked John to make sure that we included in the registration form, which was people's preferences on how they like to communicate and collaborate, because recognizing the world that we now live in, to make CSC a success, I was really conscious that we needed to think about how we form a hybrid committee that worked for the people within the committee. And so as we went through the process of doing the interviews, there were a few questions that were asked, which were around sort of achievements, but also around challenges and opportunities that applicants saw with the roles they were interested in. And we kept learning. So coming back to that continuous learning, it was sparking ideation in so many different ways. The contributions that we had from people that are now on the committee, but others that applied, it was really valuable. So my takeaway from that was, just by putting people at the heart of this change that was happening, it really helped us to engage, learn, and keep evolving. And it didn't stop. we kept evolving. And I'm wondering if Alistair and John questioned who they'd appointed in myself at the time, because we set out with the clear roles, which was the ones that you can see that we've appointed on the left-hand side. But then I was thinking about some of the things that Alistair said to me right at the beginning, early on, which was, across member groups, we have an issue with sustainability, succession planning, and how we're thinking about growing talent into the BCS governance across the community. So one of the things that I asked if it would be okay is to introduce a new role, which was a CSC member role as a co-opted member, so compliant with the terms of reference, without voting rights, and to support succession planning. So it would help us to be able to have a different lenses and viewpoints coming within the committee itself. So right now, I'm actively seeking to fill 3 CSE member roles, as well as the communications officer role. And when we do fill those roles, there will be a buddy system that's implemented. So with the wealth of experience that spans collectively over 125 years in the committee, that we'll be buddying up with perhaps some members that are earlier in their career, younger demographic, different walks of life, and bringing different experiences to help us look at things in different ways. So hopefully with this recipe that we're starting to cook up together, it gives us the ability to look at how we can support retaining existing BCS members and also attracting new members in the future as we go forwards. So finally, reflecting on good practice. So what I would just like to share here, there was a lot of focus around collaboration and sharing across 3 areas right from the beginning. And this is where there was a lot of focus around, we're trying to join the dots between the BCS and the member groups. How are we going to have the platform to enable us to do that? John, Kerry and the team were very supportive of setting up Microsoft Teams. So we now have a Microsoft Teams site that we use to communicate, I think pretty much on a daily basis, or it feels like that at the moment, with the community team. And something that's going to be announced later on today is that the BCS are going to be extending this for all member groups, that all member groups will be receiving their own Microsoft Teams environment to be able to collaborate together, share information, and make things hopefully easier to do from any device of their preference. There's also the member group forum. It's been around for some time, but now what we're starting to see is that some of the usage that we've seen on Basecamp around the volunteer forum is now starting to pivot into the member group forum. So you may have noticed that there's some links that are pointing people from the volunteer forum on Basecamp to the member group forum, which really provides the opportunity to collaborate with different groups, but also members as a whole. So there's lots of good content on there, and I'd really encourage people to use that. That will be one of the channels that CSC are going to be using to communicate with members. And then on the right-hand side, the Volunteer Hub. You may have noticed it was launched a few months ago towards the end of the summer. And that's going to be really one of the go-to places where CSC will be providing content into. But currently, one of the things that is under review, and some of this is from feedback, perhaps from people that are on the call or others, is that there's some of the content that there currently is. There's a bit of a review around what's in there right now, given it's new. And I think there's an agile approach that's being taken to this. And John mentioned around sort of how we're developing content, right? It will continuously evolve. So currently, that content is being reviewed and looking to be refreshed. But please keep an eye out for any information that's coming on Volunteer Hub and also in the members forum as we go forwards. They will be channels we will actively be using to share good practice, as well as email and other channels that people are familiar with today. So hopefully this will resonate with some of you on the call. There's been feedback from chairs and from vice chairs about having a dedicated community to have discussions and think about resources and how to access them, and thinking about that ongoing collaboration, recognizing there's some really good things that are happening in specialist groups and member groups. So listening to some of the feedback that has been, the response that BCS are providing is very much facilitating a chairs and vice chairs, specialist groups and branches quarterly event, which will be with the BCS leadership to focus on specific topics, sharing good practice, and thinking about how we can integrate changes across the whole organisation and membership. To support this as well, there's also thought about dedicated online space. So it's not just a once a quarter event, but how we can keep the momentum going throughout the year. So I think as we start thinking about this event and how we're going to be shaping it, that's going to be coming up in sort of end of Feb, middle March, there's going to be some thoughts there around what would be of interest for chairs, for vice chairs, and I think there's going to be an opportunity there to be able to input into that first session. So there's still a bit of planning that's taking place around logistics at the moment to work out where and how we're going to do this. But there is a communication plan that's being formed at the moment. So please keep an eye out on newsletters, emails, Basecamp, and anything that you see coming from the community team around this event that's going to be coming quite soon. So nearly at the end. So 5 things just really wanted to highlight. Couples reflecting on what I've already covered. But one of them, first up, there was a piece of work that was done across all of the member groups that Adam Leon Smith carried out a while ago with the communications working group. The final report is now being surfaced, which is looking at sharing best practice, identifying different channels that member groups are using to provide some recommendations around approved, non-approved tools to try and make it easier for people to understand what to use when and for what. So please expect something to come soon in that area. There's also going to be the kickoff of the CSC Community Support Committee meeting, which is going to be starting at the beginning of Feb. We've got a few things that are going to be happening between now and then. I mentioned around the new roles that we're looking to fill. So I'm actually going to be joining the new members welcome webinar in a couple of weeks. I maybe should have put that on there just to really cast the net as wide as possible. And I think that was picking up the gauntlet that Alistair laid down, which was, am I brave enough to talk to the new members, to invite them to the committee? And the answer was yes. So we really are actively going to be looking at how we can bring in new people with new ideas into the committee. There will also be the communication plan that I just referred to, and there's going to be a survey that's going to be going out across the member groups and the community to understand the level of satisfaction that there currently is today. And finally, the member group chair report has been updated. So what we're going to be looking for is going to be input from all of the member groups as we go forwards with the reports that are submitted, so we can start to surface suitable action points to be able to feed into community board as we're thinking about strategic planning. So hopefully that gives you a good flavour of the journey that went on, the experiences we encountered, what we learned. and how we pivoted at different times, and some of the good practice that we're already starting to see, but some of the things that are coming soon. So I think that's enough from me. I will mention there are bios for the all of the committee members that I mentioned earlier on, that's going to be included in the appendices of this material when it goes out. So without any further ado, I suppose handing the reins back to John and the rest of the speakers that you've heard from today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Chris, and appreciate your sore throat and kind of going through all that content, all the hard work that you put into establishing CSC.